Hi everybody, Gary Fong here in New York City. It is 2:30 in the morning, lovely time to be doing a video. But the reason why it's so early in the morning is because I am now authorized to announce the introduction of the widely anticipated, but no one got it right in terms of what the rumors were, the new Sony A7R3. Now the A7R3 has the same form factor as the A7R2, but it's a completely reworked camera from the inside out. First of all, when I saw the images, when they showed it to the press people, they showed these beautiful landscapes, with snow, and of course that tells me high dynamic range, but also these wide angle lenses, which told me that this is going to be a landscape camera. So obviously this meant that it was going to be an R-class series. So was it going to be, 42 megapixels, that size? And then it had this insane series of bald eagle, literally, and I'm sure Sony will show it in the press announcement tomorrow, landing on the water at 10 frames per second, and every single shot is tack in focus. And the reason is because it borrows the autofocus mechanism that was just introduced in the Sony A9. So you basically have a hybrid of the new Sony A9, but with 42 megapixels. Now it won't do 20 frames per second without the image blackout, but it will do 10 frames per second at a full uncompressed, let's see, I think it's a 14-bit uncompressed RAW for an amazing 16 stop dynamic range. Now this is something that's absolutely unprecedented. It also has double speed eye autofocus, like my notes here, because I wasn't allowed to really take any pictures of this slideshow. 399 phase detection autofocus points over, it's not the entire screen. I think it's it was something 68% or something like that of the screen went by really quick. For those of you who, and it also has 5-axis in-body stabilization, plus it also has silent shutter. So this is the first A7R that has silent shutter, and the fastest in right now, the A9 autofocus. It also has, for you cinematographers here, it has the much improved subject tracking. I think, 399 is it AF points. Also has a touchscreen where you can rack focus on the touchscreen, and also it has a new thing called hybrid log gamma HDR. So that is it's an S-Log, and the way that it was explained to me is that it is an S-Log with high dynamic range that it comes with its own encoding software. So when you're color grading, you can put in your color grading. It also has the preview mode, which will allow you to see what it's going to look like outside of the dull S-Log mode. But this will kind of ride in a companion file that will go directly to Sony TVs and allow the Sony TV to take your S-Log-ish high dynamic range video file and turn it into a spectacular 4K image with high dynamic range directly out of the camera, without having to process it, if that makes any sense. You don't process it. It comes out basically in the S-Log, but with the companion file that tells the television what to do. But it's also the first camera with 4K high dynamic range. So you have a camera that, for cinematographers, it does 120 frames per second in the slow mode, and it also does quick shooting, which is it's that time lapse. It has built-in time lapse, and I don't remember what I mentioned, but it shoots 14-bit uncompressed RAW, something like with a cache of 87 images at 10 frames per second in uncompressed RAW. In compressed RAW. In uncompressed RAW, I remember off the top of my head, it was something like in the 30s, 2730 or something like that. So ISO 100 to 32,000, back illuminated sensor for extremely low noise. It also has a pixel shift function, which will allow you to take 4 images within half a second, and then it will basically line up, kind of like an anti-moire filter or In the old days, I think it was Sigma that had a foveon camera that had something that would take the different lights that came into the different buckets, green, red, blue, in the Bayer sensors, and under the foveon it was a different layer, I believe, of the different buckets, so that you wouldn't have moire, but you would also have the ability to have greater image sharpening because they could line up the pixels. In this one, it has a mode, it's one of the shooting modes where you can actually shoot with a pixel shift, giving you much more, we saw these prints, incredibly improved dynamic range in the mid-tone range, detail, and in the contrast. It was really quite spectacular. And so it does this in the software in post-processing, so it will give you a much better resolution than 42.2 megapixels when you have to have the pixels out of alignment and then without an anti-aliasing filter. So that was really kind of an interesting thing. Again, it has 399 phase detection points, covering, I believe it was half of the, they wouldn't allow us to take any pictures of the slide, so I kind of have to go off my memory and my notes, but covering half of the sensor, and then it was something like 75% under contrast detection, but the subject tracking is much, much faster than it's ever been before, because it borrows that from the Sony A9. And the eye autofocus, we saw a demonstration of it with a model in motion. And again, on the A9, I have been able to shoot sports with eye autofocus, so it's really been kind of an incredible thing. It was pretty much not said, but it seemed to be directed toward the landscape and outdoor photographer, because when you think about it, you have ultimate resolution at 42.2 megapixel, the greatest sharpness, but then plus also it has that insane dynamic range, right? 16 stops? 16 stop dynamic range. Then you add to that 10 frames per second with the same autofocus capability as the Sony A9, and what do you have? You have the ultimate wedding camera. 2 slots for the SD cards, and a beautiful feature, which is of course that new big honking new battery that goes, I don't know the model number, but that goes into the Sony A9. So you've got yourself at, I believe it's $3,200 coming out at the end of November. Pretty darn interesting camera. $3,200, incredible megapixel, fastest autofocus, 10 frames per second, which sounds a little bit kind of meh to a person who just shot with the A9 at 20 frames per second. But remember, compare that to the fastest DSLRs, 10 frames per second is extremely fast. So there you have it from New York. Tomorrow at I think it's 10 o'clock, they are going to do the worldwide announcement, but they gave us the kind of sneak preview so that we could have this information out for you at 2:30 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe for all of the latest news on photography at my website on YouTube. Okay, thanks.